Hi, I'm Jason Gorber from ThatShelf.com, and we're here to talk about the latest James Bond film.
Big shelf.
So, for almost a generation, it feels like, James Bond has meant one person. It's meant Daniel Craig. For many of us, we grew up with the sort of trappings of the late 60s and the 70s stuff, the Sean Connerys, the Roger Moores, into some of the more silly things as they went along. Pierce Brosnan, when he was finally cast, after being in a television show where he's very suave and wore a tuxedo, certainly felt the part, but it became very sort of cartoonish and comic booky, which had always had that element, that the sort of spy element. But right around the sort of Jason Bourne era, I guess it was, or even the Mission Impossible era, the stakes of what it meant to be a James Bond movie were going to increase. And you're going to get something that was a lot darker, a lot more, for lack of a better word, realistic, but certainly with a grittiness that had been lacking in a lot of the films at that point. I mean, you weren't going to get Moonraker again. You weren't going to get some of the overt silliness, and even when it was there, it was going to be done within the scope of sort of modern action filmmaking and sort of stand side by side with some of the great action films that were being made at the time. So you got stuff like this. This is the Daniel Craig set on 4K, includes extended unrated versions of a bunch of stuff. But yeah, so what do we start with? Well, we started with Casino Royale. And it's sort of a throwback of sorts. Obviously, it goes back to one of the original books and also one of the original tellings of the tale. It went from Baccarat to poker, which, if that's not indicative of everything that's going on, you had Mads Mikkelsen as the big baddie. It was very self-contained. It felt like it touched upon things that were sort of greater than taking place with the narrative, but it definitely felt like it was a film that had a beginning, middle, and end. And we really were introduced to this fantastic portrayal by Daniel Craig of James Bond. They even twisted all kinds of sort of stock imagery. It was Bond coming out of the water wearing the tight swim trunks, which I know many, many people enjoyed. Quantum of Solace got a lot of challenge when it first came out. I think people hadn't sort of thought of it in the way that I sort of enjoyed thinking about it as literally the continuation of everything that took place in Casino Royale. The opening sequence, the action sequence is amazing. The car chase is absolutely phenomenal. And again, it takes everything that was in Casino Royale and just elevates it and makes it a little bit more complex. And we start getting this notion of sort of a larger things at play, things dangerous, things that there's an undercurrent of dread at play, which made it sort of feel, for lack of a better word, commensurate with some of the other stuff that we have, the sort of Marvel nonsense, the greater cinematic universe, as it were, of James Bond, that you had all these machinations sort of at play and playing out. By the time you got to Skyfall, it really did sort of feel that they were humanizing this character in a way of bringing in his backstory, of bringing in the sense of nostalgia with the old car suddenly making its formidable appearance, and the connection that he had with M. Really culminating in something that's quite dramatic. It's incredibly beautiful to look at. Skyfall is a stunning film visually, and really sort of felt like the end of that trilogy. and we're like, okay, so this is going to be, these are the Daniel Craig films. And then they made Spectre, and you're like, okay, so Spectre is going to give us this sense of that all of these things that have taken place weren't just sort of one-off baddies who are after them, but really a much larger sort of criminal syndicate run by Christoph Waltz, and that somehow all of these machinations were really what was undercutting all of the violence and all of the drama and the dread that Bond had been sort of suffering. And again, by the time the Spectre ends, you're like, okay, so this is kind of where we're at. And even Daniel Craig himself is like, okay, I'm done. And then obviously they're like, no, we're not quite done yet. And we get No Time to Die. And Is it necessary? It's not necessary in almost any way. Is it fun? Yeah. Is it a bit slow and long and even more, not exposition, but certainly character moments of conversation in between the action bits than normal? It certainly feels like it. But it's still thoroughly enjoying to sort of re-explore this world. And what's weird is it's the culmination. And I'm going to try really hard not to be super spoilery, but everybody knows this is Daniel Craig's last Bond. That this is really, really the end of the chapter. And just as many people weren't necessarily surprised about what it was like when some of, let's say, certain Star Wars characters came back and you knew they were probably not going to make it through, you sort of know that that's how it's going to play out here. It doesn't take such narrative jump to think, oh my God, when they're ending it, they're really going to end it. As I said, I'm dancing around all this stuff. The cast is crazy. That's what I'm looking at here. The cast obviously includes Daniel Craig. The big baddie is Rami Malek. Spoiler. In a funny way, he's in the credits. You know, he's got to show up eventually. Doesn't show up really with his face until halfway through the film. He's super chill. He's sort of an anti-Bond villain, and it's interesting to have him and Christoph Waltz in the film at the same time, because both of them are, in a funny way, being relatively subdued. Literally, Blofeld's sort of locked up, and is giving out information which is relatively beneficial to how it all plays out. Lisa Seydoux back has a sort of initial thing, and then plays a much more important role. And again, her character feels more functional at times than truly sort of embedded in the storyline. But it is what it is. Lashana Lynch, Ben Winshaw, Naomi Harris, Jeffrey Wright, Christoph Waltz, and Ralph Fiennes. It's Lashana Lynch plays a new character, a new 00 character, as a form of replacement. And they don't really know how to use her, unfortunately. There's lots of sort of funny repartee about her dealing with the bureaucracy, the dynamic when you basically have the Americans versus the Brits, and there's some interesting things that play there. But it really, for me, doesn't work on a fundamental level. It's like they didn't really know how well to actually pull that all together. I know it was written and it went through lots and lots of drafts. They actually brought in Cary Joji I gotta get his name right. Cary Joji Fukunaga. I apologize every time that I get his name incorrect. He did True Detective. He did Beast of No Nation. Very talented indie filmmaker. Helped script it. Along with Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, who are sort of stalwarts of the James Bond stuff. But it's Phoebe Waller-Bridge that they brought in to sort of give it a little bit more comedic oomph. And it's there, I guess. There's a couple moments that are quite jovial, for lack of a better word. Honestly, the one sequence that really worked for me was Cuba. And I really love the dynamic, and there's certain characters there, I don't want to, again, give out too much away, that is like, oh, this is really great. I love this dynamic, this sort of handshake dynamic that takes place. And I'm like, yeah, I would love this movie. I would love this part to carry on, and I don't need to worry about all this other heavy stuff with all the baggage. There's something to be said about a sociopath, like murderer, like James Bond, who comes somewhere, finds the beautiful people around them, completely engages with them, and then completely abandons them. That's part of his being. It's certainly not correct. It's certainly not in keeping with many expectations of what we have for contemporary heroes. And in some ways, this film tries to redress some of his more hostile elements and make him a much more agreeable person that you'd want to take home. I'm not sure that benefits the James Bond character nearly as much as it should, but maybe it benefits the film-going audience to feel that they've invested in a character who isn't just, a crazy government assassin, which is fundamentally what it is, alcoholic, which is fundamentally what it is. And weird way, yeah, they actually make drinking jokes about this, as if the entirety of James Bond's ethic has been him being completely loaded and having to get through only to go kill someone. In terms of stunts, there's some phenomenal stuff, incredible motorcycle stunts, some great racing stunts, some pretty nice visual stuff, especially on in places like Norway. And then you have long stretches where it's basically you're in a studio, a couple characters talking to one another, and it only really makes sense if you have everything invested in Daniel Craig's version of James Bond. It's not just the character Bond and the iconography of Bond, it's him and what he has gone through and what his version of this character has gone through. And unless you sort of are invested in all that, none of this is going to matter to you. It doesn't earn its stuff. The other films have earned everything that sort of takes place here. And because of that, I think some people will be a little bit dissatisfied. I think it's fine. I think it's a good film. I think it's visually quite great. I saw it on a terrible projection. I look forward to seeing it, hopefully, knock on plastic, in IMAX. I really want to see it in its biggest scope as possible. It definitely lacks some of the precision of some of the earlier directors brought. The sense of when it was grand in scope that it was really going to work. I think in the Mexico City sequence from something like Spectre, it's amazing. There's nothing that really plays along that. Even the car chases, as spectacular as they are, all those tend to be done by the Bond sort of team. Excuse me. The Bond team, who are a series of second unit directors who this is what they've done for decades, well before Craig actually got on. And so that stuff just absolutely feels fresh and vital, and it's usually the regular director, the sort of top line director, who does all the character bits. And it's the character bits here that didn't work necessarily as well as they probably needed to, but they worked fine and well enough for a general audience to sort of respond and feel a sense of empathy for what actually takes into place in the film. So, as a culmination of Craig, as it were, the film is satisfactory. It is good. It is not breathtakingly amazing. It's also entirely redundant. But given the fact that we've waited so long for it, given the fact that, it's really fun to see stuff on the big screen that we've been waiting for, I definitely think it's a film worth your time, especially if you're a fan of all this crazy stuff. I look forward to it sort of joining here and being the closing chapter, one that's pretty much earned as it continues. One that is entirely built upon everything great that Craig has brought in stunning ways to this role. I really look forward to all the other things he's going to be doing. I think Knives Out showed people about just how much fun he can be. People who haven't seen things like Munich and some of the other incredible stuff he's done haven't really given him a chance to get sort of outside the bubble that is James Bond, and I think that'll be great. He will make a fortune making this film. He will go on to make some films that I think will be even more extraordinary than this. In the meantime, we have no better place to end the Daniel Craig era of James Bond than this one. Thanks so much for watching. For ThatShelf.com, I'm Jason Gorber. Please subscribe. Please follow us on social media, and we will see you next video.